Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. Going from last week's theme where I spoke about activation energies and drew some wisdom from my time as a chemist to things I was dealing with today, I'm going to go through exactly the same process, but with another concept from my time when I was very much obsessed with chemistry. And that is something that you're taught in high school when you're learning chemical reactions, and it is the concept of a limiting reagent. So the technical definition for what a limiting reagent is, it is the reactant that gets consumed first in a chemical reaction and therefore limits how much product can be formed. So let me try to break that down first with an example from chemistry, and then I will give you a layperson's example. So in chemical terms, if we look at water, there is a reaction to produce water, and one way to produce water is to react hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. So you can literally combust hydrogen and oxygen, and you can produce water vapor as a product. And the way that reacts is, if you look at the formula for water, it is H2O. And so for every 2 hydrogen molecules we have, we need 1 oxygen molecule. So if I were to write out this formula on paper, I would say 2H2 plus O2 gives me 2H2O. And if you imagine a reaction where I had 2 molecules of hydrogen gas and 2 molecules of oxygen gas, and I provided the energy for those to react, then what we would actually have is we would only produce 1 molecule of water, not 2 molecules of water. And the reason being is that if we remember the ratio, I need 2 molecules of hydrogen for every 1 molecule of oxygen. And therefore, if I started off with 2 molecules of hydrogen and 2 molecules of oxygen, I'm going to consume all of my hydrogen first. Therefore, the hydrogen in that reaction that I specifically gave you is going to be the limiting reagent, because it determines how much product is formed. So because we had less hydrogen than what we needed to completely react with all of the oxygen, hydrogen is our limiting reagent. Now that might have been gone over your head, so let me give you a very simple example. Take a reaction and let's think of it as preparing a food. So if I have a simple recipe that I want to produce, and let's say it's a hot dog. To produce a hot dog, I need 1 hot dog bun and 1 Frankfurt sausage. And so I need 1 bun and 1 sausage to produce 1 hot dog. So if I told you that I have 3 hot dog buns, but only 2 sausages, and I asked you how many hot dogs can we make, the answer is we can only make 2 hot dogs. But we had 3 buns. So in this reaction that we're talking about, preparing a hot dog, what was the limiting reagent? And the answer is the limiting reagent was sausages. And because we had less sausages than buns, that determined how many hot dogs we could make. And the concept of limiting reagent, it's actually very broadly applicable. And whether we're aware of it or not, we actually deal with this and see this all the time in the world around us. If you take a workplace, for example, there is the phrase, the drunkest elf on the production line. And what that means is, if you imagine Santa's workshop and all the elves are on a production line preparing toys, you've got 1 elf carving the wood, 1 elf painting it, 1 elf wrapping it, and so on and so forth. If you have a single production line and you've got 1 drunk elf on the production line, it doesn't matter how fast all the workers before that elf are working or how fast the workers after that elf can work, because you've got 1 drunk elf holding up production. That is the drunk elf on the production line. That elf is the limiting reagent for how fast that production line can produce toys. And in a workplace environment, I've actually been this person before, because when I first became a software engineer, and this is going to be true for anyone who is a junior in any profession, when I first joined my team, I was a self-taught developer who went from this kind of data engineering ETL role into a software developer role, and I was working with engineers who had 10 to 20 years of experience, incredibly bright people. And I was the drunk elf on the production line. I was the limiting reagent, because if we had anything to do as a team, I was the person who would take the longest, have to read the most docs, make the most mistakes, have to ask the most questions. Now, of course, that's a natural thing. It's not inherently a bad thing, because that's how people develop and grow, and every organization needs to be training people to occupy roles in the future, because they're not just going to magically appear. But in that particular context, I was the drunk elf on the production line. And you see this with economies and countries as well. You have a country that wants to export more coffee, but it is limited by the amount of land that it has to grow coffee. So in this case, if the goal is to produce more coffee, and they have the labor and they have the talent and everything, the limiting reagent is going to be the land that's available. So the concept of limiting reagents, it's a very useful thing in the world around us, and we should really be looking out for these things, because I think a lot of problems that can be solved is looking for limiting reagents around us and saying, how can we actually go and solve that? Can we find a way to get more of that input to make this happen? And this now brings me back to, how does the concept of limiting reagents deal with some of the challenges that I'm currently facing? And the answer is, because I'm now working independently and dealing with different types of work in the software engineering world than I previously have, I have had to come heads first with my own limiting reagents. So right now, I am working on Android development. So I'm working on mobile applications. And a big part of a mobile application is that people actually need something to interact with. When they open up the application, there's going to be a screen, there's going to be buttons, data is going to be displayed, it has to look a certain way for it to be attractive to people. And that is actually not a skill that I cultivated. In fact, when I first started software engineering, I kind of realized within the first maybe 1 to 3 months of my role that we're not actually, or me in particular, I'm not doing as much front-end engineering work. So I'm not designing the things that the users actually interact with. And I was working more on the back-end systems, on the APIs, so the things that kind of send data and process data and speak between a server and the front end that users see. And I was working more on business logic and optimizing databases, and there was all sorts of interesting work involved with scaling a service, but I wasn't actually doing the visual side of software engineering, which is building a front end that people can interact with. And for a long time, I didn't need this. I said, this is not important. It's not something that I need in this particular role, because we do a lot more back-end engineering. But now that I've left that particular company and I'm working on my own and building full stack applications, all of a sudden, my big limiting reagent I've realized is the fact that you've never done conventional web development, and you've never done responsive design. You've never thought about what color schemes to use and how to make something palatable for the end user. So this is a limiting reagent within myself, because I have a portion of the skill set, but my ability to produce is limited by my skill in this particular area. And so this week I spent a good portion of my Monday and Tuesday just trying to upskill. I was learning the bare minimum of UI and UX, and kind of going through, really taking a look at the mobile apps I use day to day just to see how things kind of work. Not that there's anything that's good or bad, but I'm just trying to see, what have other companies, what have other developers done when they produce mobile applications? Like, what should I be focusing on? And so I invested 2 days into kind of getting a very high level understanding of what's out there. And I have been learning some front-end frameworks. And this is part of me addressing the fact that I do have this limiting reagent. And what I realized is, when I address this limiting reagent and I complete my application, where I've got very kind of basic MVP up at the moment, I will have more limiting reagents to deal with in the future. It will be, now once the app is finished, my limiting reagent will then become, what do I need to do to submit this to Play Store? What requirements do I need to meet? And then once I learn what I need to do that, it will be, how do you market this? And in the future, maybe not for this, but for other ventures I'm in, it will be, okay, my limiting reagent is my ability to speak to people. It's my ability to sell. And that's something I will have to work on. So identifying what the limiting reagents are in our lives is very important, because then we can target our energies onto dealing with those limiting reagents, so we can go and produce what we need to produce. And so we can unlock our creativity. Because if there is a state we want to get to and we're seemingly not getting there, then we really need to think about, what is our limiting reagent? Like, what is stopping us from getting from A to B? And if we go all the way back to the start of this podcast, in that equation, in that reaction between hydrogen and water, we had 2 hydrogen and 2 oxygen. we didn't have enough hydrogen. And if I go to the hot dog example after that, we had 3 hot dog buns, but only 2 sausages. So we needed another sausage. In my current case, I know that, okay, I've got some back-end engineering skill set. I'm good at solving kind of problems where no one sees the direct result, but I'm not really good at design. I'm not really good at aesthetics. So that's my limiting reagent. But I know there will be continually more limiting reagents as I go ahead. Me solving today's limiting reagent it's not a process that will ever end in my entire life. I will be doing this forever, identifying what the limiting reagent is and attempting to solve that problem. So my prompt to everyone listening to this is think about what limiting reagents are you facing in your life, and this could be in your professional life, in your personal life, in your relationships, in some bloody hobby that you're trying to do on the weekend. What is the limiting reagent that's been holding you back? And what can you do? What steps can you take? Even if it's the simplest step. Like I literally spent maybe at most 8 hours just doing some really basic upskilling at the start of the week to kind of help me get through the tickets I create for myself. And it was definitely helpful. I learned so much this week, and some part of it was from more formal learning at the start of the week, but a lot of it has been because I've kind of just minimally equipped myself. I've been able to learn on the job as I go ahead and create this mobile application. So really ask yourself, what are the limiting reagents that you're facing, and what is something really small that you could do today to kind of get that reaction happen? What is something that you could add more of, or what's a skill that you could improve in? And it doesn't need to be a long, arduous process, because we have such an abundance of information available to us. Your input could be really, really, really low effort, but it is something that could make a drastic difference if you truly have identified a limiting reagent. And you have to make sure that you're identifying the right thing. Because if we go back to the hot dog example, for example, if you know you need 1 hot dog to every hot dog bun, and you have 3 hot dog buns, but you incorrectly misdiagnose that the hot dog bun is what you're missing, and you add another hot dog bun, even though you now have 4 hot dog buns and 2 sausages, you're still only going to produce 2 hot dogs. So really give it some thought and try to figure out how we can solve the limiting reagents in our lives. So I'm going to end this episode there, and to everyone listening to this, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.